My name is Miriam Kalk. I am head of design practice at the Education Design Lab, and so excited to be here with y'all in my hometown of Austin, Texas, talking about a framework we use across all of our work at the Education Design Lab to really strongly support learners' engagement. So my hope in the next 30 minutes is that I can support you all building a foundational understanding of this framework and leave you with some design tools that you can take back to whatever context you're working in to use in collaboration with learners so that you can put this framework into practice too. I'm going to start with just a brief introduction to the lab, just so you understand the context of work that we are using this framework in. So we are a national nonprofit that works with players across the learn and work ecosystem to co-design transformative solutions that better center learners and workers in this ecosystem to lead to increased access to economic opportunity. So we work with all kinds of different players across this space, tons of community colleges, other post-secondary education institutions, learning providers, employers, workforce organizations, and really whole communities and ecosystems. And of course, at the core of all of that is learners. So we use a particular approach to design across all of our work that guides us in how to collaborate with learners and other folks who are close to the problems that we're trying to tackle, and in collaboration with them, designed to address the problems that they are experiencing to work toward equitable innovation and transformation. So we deeply believe in the concept of process as product at the lab. So we believe and hold true to the idea that if we want to create equitable transformation, if we want to get to equitable results, then the process that we need to take to get there in terms of how we do design needs to be equitable as well. So again, huge focus in our work on direct collaboration with learners. And I think you'll hear that through the way that we recommend using this framework as well as we move through today. So given that focus on direct work with learners, what better way to start a discussion of learner engagement than with a few quotes from learners. So I'm going to show you a few quotes on the screen, and I'll also read them aloud. These come from learners who have been directly engaged in design work with the lab in the past. Most of these learners were enrolled at community colleges when we spoke with them. I am a full-time student, I work full-time, and I'm a full-time mom. It's hard to balance everything. I don't know what my bigger picture goals for school and my career are. I am stuck at trying to figure that out. I was a high school dropout. I didn't think that I'd even go to college because it just wasn't who I was. I felt like I'm not smart enough. I can't work right now because my school schedule won't allow me to. So it's hard because if I put my daughter in daycare, I won't be able to go to school because I can't pay for it, so I'll have to go to work. But the whole point of me putting her in daycare was so I can go to school. 5 years from now, I want a home to call my own with some land my kids can play safely on and create memories. I want to have a garden to show them how to grow their own food like my parents did. I want to be able to afford to go on vacations with my family. Above all, I crave financial stability. Having my daughter motivated me. I just want to provide for her and to work towards self-fulfillment. I want to have a job where I can be happy and feel happy every day. So I'd love to give you all a second just to reflect on what stood out to you in those quotes. So much to say, and no wrong answers here by any means, but to me, something that felt really powerful about all of those is that in each of them, a learner is sharing really, really important insight with us about the kind of support that their learning environments need to provide them with in order for them to engage now and in the future with their learning. So at the lab, like I mentioned before, we really believe that learner-centered design has never been more crucial than it is now. And we think that in order to build a more equitable future in the learn and work ecosystem, we have to really critically consider this question and tackle this in partnership with learners. How might we redesign learning environments to really strongly support engagement and well-being for learners who have been historically underinvested and underserved? So I've already said the word engagement like 100 times, so I should probably tell you what that means in this context. I'll also share these slides with y'all afterward, just so you know. So you'll have access to this and to a bunch of other resources and design tools as well. But when I'm talking about learner engagement in this context, you can think of that in terms of behaviors and thoughts and feelings that learners are having about their learning and in the context of their learning. And in particular, when we're thinking about engagement, it's really crucial to talk about quality of engagement. There is a ton of research we'll talk about in just a second that indicates that high quality engagement is causally connected with learning outcomes, persistence and retention in school, goal attainment, learner satisfaction in school. All of this, of course, can have a huge impact on learners' careers and their lives. And we also know from this research that high quality engagement is directly connected to learners' well-being now and into the future. Another really critical insight that we know from research is that no learner is inherently engaged or disengaged. So even though we may hear and say things like, Miriam is the most disengaged learner in this class, she just doesn't show up, she just doesn't pay attention, or Miriam is the most super engaged learner I've ever met, she hangs on to my every word in the classroom. I have been both of those Miriams at different points in my life, right? And probably we've all had experiences like that. So conveniently, we know that because this engagement isn't inherent to people, what research tells us is that what shapes the kind of engagement, the quality of engagement that we experience, is the way that the learning environments we're in satisfy or frustrate particular key drivers of engagement for us as individuals. Lucky for us, there is a giant body of work that y'all may or may not have heard of called Self-Determination Theory that has been created over the last 50 years through thousands of research studies by psychologists and other researchers all around the world that tells us that those key drivers of engagement, those really basic psychological needs that need to be fulfilled by our learning environments in order for us to experience high quality engagement are growth, belonging, and agency. So we'll dig into these a lot deeper, but super briefly and at a high level, growth is about learners feeling like they can be successful and like they're making progress toward futures and goals that matter to them. Belonging is about feeling embraced as your authentic self. And agency is about a learner feeling like they are in the driver's seat of their learning experience. So again, we'll dig a lot deeper into all of those, but at the lab, what we have done is taken some core insights from, again, this giant body of work, translated them and really distilled particular concepts to make them more approachable and actionable for us and our partners to use across our design work. So if you've ever read any self-determination theory or SDT literature, I use slightly different words here than you may see in papers and things, but the core concepts are the same. And this kind of translation has allowed us to work with our partners to, again, really just start to act on this framework and actually bring it into collaboration with learners pretty immediately. Another thing that we really focus on in our work at the lab with self-determination theory, with this engagement framework, is focusing on how to support growth, belonging, and agency for, as I mentioned before, learners who have been most deeply underinvested in and underserved in particular educational contexts. So we really leverage this concept of designing at the margins in our work generally and in application of this framework. So as an example, I do a lot of work with single moms at the lab. I have for the last 5 years, and it's really, really powerful, of course, just to focus on working with single moms to understand what will support their sense of growth, belonging, and agency in the context that they're in learning. It can be even more powerful if we can get more specific about within the population of single moms who's actually experiencing barriers most intensely and barriers to these engagement drivers in particular. So, for example, in some contexts, it could be especially valuable to collaborate with single moms who perhaps are working multiple jobs while trying to go to school to get that to the next stage of their careers, and perhaps don't have a lot of family support locally to be able to rely on for childcare. And maybe they're also from low-income backgrounds, so don't have a ton of financial resources to rely on and draw on during this time of so many competing priorities. So if we can figure out with that learner how to support their sense of growth, belonging, and agency and transform systems in accordance with that, that can have this ripple effect, right? That leads to better support for other single moms and parenting learners, for working adult learners, and possibly for the whole learner population. So again, the application of this framework in a really equity-centered way can be incredibly powerful for helping to bridge gaps to fulfillment of these drivers for many, many learners in our populations. Another thing I want to mention up top is that, because this is a question we get a lot, it is not a question of choosing between support for these engagement drivers or support for basic tangible needs. In the literature, these engagement drivers are actually referred to as basic psychological needs. But we also know from tons of research, I think we can all probably relate to this idea too, that if a learner is experiencing food insecurity, housing insecurity, financial insecurity, it will probably be much more difficult for them to experience a sense of growth, belonging, and agency, right? To feel like they can make progress in school, to feel like they're in the driver's seat, able to prioritize school with all of their other life priorities, to feel like they really belong in that experience. So just want to highlight that and say that up top, that in order to really deeply satisfy these engagement drivers, we have to start with a foundation of support for basic tangible needs as well. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these three drivers. I will say that this research in self-determination theory has been done across so many different domains of life and the world. A ton of that research has been in education, certainly. I will be using examples here that primarily relate to the lab's work in post-secondary education and workforce training, but know that the core concepts here are really relevant no matter what part of education you're working in, or in the workplace, or in parenting, or in all different kinds of domains. So happy to talk with y'all afterward if you want to consider ways that this could be applied in more specific contexts. Oh, here. A little bit more about the growth engagement driver. So like I mentioned before, in the literature, growth is actually called competence. So this engagement driver is really about supporting learners feeling like they can succeed and like they can make progress toward goals that matter to them. So it's not about if I can see that a learner is making progress and growing, it's about if that learner is experiencing that and can feel that themselves and see that in their work. And again, that personal relevance of the kind of growth they're experiencing is really, really critical for this driver. It doesn't matter if I have goals for a learner that are different from theirs. In fact, that could be frustrating for their sense of growth. If I'm saying, you should be reaching for goal A, and that doesn't feel relevant for them. So these are just a few quotes that perhaps communicate different ways that learners may indicate that they're experiencing frustration or fulfillment of this sense of growth for themselves. I know this is brief, but I will make sure y'all have the slides afterward. For each of these drivers, I'm going to share a few example strategies or starter ideas for ways that you could, in a given context, support learners' sense of growth. I'll say again that there's no guarantee that any single intervention or program is going to really strongly support any of these drivers for all learners or any learner. It's always going to be a question of engaging directly with those learners to understand what their experience is in terms of that driver in the context that they're in. But things that we've seen be really relevant at the lab, and I won't have time to highlight everything here, but we've seen that it can be really important on the classroom level, as we talk about a lot, right, to offer frequent formative feedback for learners that, again, helps them feel like they can succeed by paving that way, that path forward for them from wherever they are. So models that are more competency-based and switch focus from performance to progress and learning can be really, really powerful for learners' sense of growth. I mean, again, that can make that goal attainment feel more personalized as well for them. At a more systemic level, opportunities to directly combine work and learning, and again, to help learners see and feel how they're making progress continuously can be really powerful. So at the lab, we do a lot of work with micro-pathways or stackable micro-credential pathways in which learners see the way that they are making progress in terms of their skills in a very regular manner. And they also see the ways that those skills are tied to the workplace. And so in terms of the sense of growth, right, and that relevance for learners who have goals that are very career-oriented, that can be a really powerful model for them in terms of supporting, again, regular feelings of progress toward those goals that they feel are critical for their lives. This is just a starter list, right? So there are a zillion other things that could be relevant in other contexts. So sense of belonging. Belonging is, of course, a thing we talk about all the time as educators, but certainly a critical part of this model. In this world of self-determination theory, of this engagement framework, belonging is certainly about people feeling embraced for who they are. It's about them feeling a really strong sense of support from their environment and from relationships in that environment. And it can also be very strongly supported by people feeling like they are contributing uniquely to that whole that is greater than just themselves. So it's about support, but in many cases also about that sense of contribution and value. Just a few quotes again. And again, like I mentioned before, regardless of what role you're in, right, whether you're in the classroom or engaging directly with learners as an advisor, or maybe working at a more systemic level, there are things that we are each doing to shape these drivers for learners all the time, because we're all, whether we are realizing it or not, designing different elements of their experiences. So if you're more on the ground with learners, then doing everything that you can in your relationships with them to really be focused on asset-based approaches in understanding who they are and informing relationships with them. There's a lot of research that shows that relationships that support a learner's sense of growth and agency, those other engagement drivers, have an outsized positive impact on belonging as well. So that can have huge implications for, let's say an advising relationship or a relationship with a faculty member. At a more systemic level, certainly something that can, just create an environment in which those kinds of really powerful, positive relationships can thrive is investments in inclusive, anti-oppressive institutional cultures, policies, practices, training for faculty and staff in empathy, in anti-bias training, DEI training can be really powerful as well. And again, that structural embedding of opportunities for relationship building between learners and other learners who are having similar experiences to them, mentors, faculty, and staff, can be really crucial. We have some partners who have done an incredible job at community colleges in streamlining opportunities for relationship building and receiving support through single-pointed advising models, as an example, that bring together career advising, case management, academic advising into one person who can then have a really powerful relationship with that learner and again, support their sense of growth and agency in a really powerful way through making it easier for them to access resources and supports that are relevant for them. Other things that are not listed here, of course, that could be powerful for belonging, but just some food for thought. And then last but not least, agency. Agency is, again, like I mentioned, all about learners feeling like they're in the driver's seat. So that certainly has to do with them having the opportunity to make meaningful choices about their learning experiences and their journeys. But it also has to do with them understanding and feeling alignment between things that they don't get to make choices about and their values, goals, experiences. So in cases where let's say that a learner doesn't get to make a choice about the pace at which a course is moving. If you can help them understand why that regulation or that policy is in place and how that actually could be supportive for them, if it would be, of the direction that they want to head, right? Then that could actually be an agency supportive model. If it is something that just feels controlling to them and sort of arbitrary, is probably really frustrating for their sense of agency. I know I had the second quote before, but it just gets me every time, right? What a horrific and powerful example of someone not having the opportunity to make choices about things that are really, really critical for them in terms of bringing work and school and life together. Certainly, again, on more of a classroom level, but also a systemic level, offering learners choices that, like I mentioned, really feel meaningful for them in terms of what matters most to them about their school experience is really important. We've seen in our work at the lab that offering choices about time, place, pace of learning, but also products of learning can be really powerful for agency. So offering people choices about what kinds of projects they want to do or evidence that they might offer to represent their learning can be really helpful. Supporting exploration of interests in ways that can allow learners to identify what is the future I want for myself, what path do I want to go down, can be powerful as well. And another thing I want to highlight here, because it comes up a lot in our work at the lab, is this notion of recognizing learners' skills and really celebrating those, regardless of how they built them. We have a huge body of work called X-Credit at the lab that really focuses on awarding credit for experience, right, for skills built through experience, whether that's through work or life or other learning opportunities. And awarding credit for learner skills in that way can be really helpful in supporting their sense of agency, because then I'm not taking classes that don't feel meaningful for me, right? I'm not spending my precious time going through learning experiences that don't feel like they are actually going to take me further in the direction of my goals. And certainly, again, that tight alignment between, for learners who have career-oriented goals, between industry, work opportunities, and the classroom can be really powerful as well. So that was a lot. And that was just a rapid fire sort of mini deep dive into each of these drivers. But my hope is that you can start to see how this framework can really serve as a lens that we can look through all the time to understand experiences that learners are having and work with them to figure out how to better support their well-being, support their engagement, and support them having opportunities to really work toward those futures that they want for themselves. So at the lab, we again use this framework all the time in our work and really use it to inform the way that we're making choices all the time about how we're engaging with learners and what we're hearing from them and what they're telling us about what needs to be shifted, right? It's helping us understand, what do we need to optimize for? You can think of this as this, support for growth, belonging, and agency as a means to an end in terms of what we know from research about support for these drivers and engagement, retention, goal attainment, well-being. But we also know that these are core ingredients along with basic tangible needs of well-being for humans, right? So if we can focus on supporting these, we can support learners moving toward those futures that they want and feeling really deeply supported and a sense of well-being along the way. I'm not going to go into detail about our design approach at the lab. There's so much to say about this, and there's some more information included in the materials I'll share with y'all as well. But I just want to highlight, like I mentioned before, we are all designing things all day, every day in our jobs, whether we call it that or not. The lab, we borrow a definition of designer from Creative Reaction Lab, another nonprofit, that says that designers are people who have agency to make decisions that impact people in the environment, right? That's a very expansive definition of design. And again, we're all designing things every day that impact learners. So if we can start to recognize what it is that we're designing, recognize the way that perhaps we can be more consciously and intentionally understanding learners' experiences, ideating with them, brainstorming with them about what could be different to better support these engagement drivers for them, prototyping or trying new things in collaboration with them based on their recommendations to more strongly support these engagement drivers, and just incorporate this into the way that we're doing our work anyway, we can potentially make a lot of headway in terms of how we're supporting learners. So in the handouts that I will give y'all and that you can access through a QR code link in just a second, there's a few different design tools here that we have seen in our work with partners really can lower the barrier to entry to people starting to put this framework into action. One of these is an environment analysis tool where you can, as a thought experiment for yourself, to start internalizing this framework or directly in collaboration with learners from the beginning, start to understand what, for a particular group of learners or individual who you want to more strongly support, what might be frustrating or supporting each of these engagement drivers for that person in a given learning context or environment that they're in. What ideas do you and that learner have for how to better support these drivers? And what questions you need to dig deeper into to better understand what barriers are existing today and what opportunities for impact exist in the future. And then again, it's really critical for us to think in a comprehensive way about satisfaction of these drivers. It's not just about if once you get 6 months into your learning experience, are you going to feel a really strong sense of growth, belonging, and agency? We really need to focus always on how we can, end to end, offer really strong support and fulfillment of these drivers, especially for learners who have been underinvested in. So these other tools offer sort of a simple journey mapping exercise to think in a more staged way about how to support these drivers for learners across their whole lifetime with us. And also, we often use this kind of Venn diagram, which it may be hard to see from where you are, but again, trying to get to the center of a Venn diagram where you're thinking about how are we supporting all three of these engagement drivers in each moment of a learner's experience is really critical. And again, always important to check our assumptions, learn directly from learners. There's always more to learn from people who are directly living this day to day. So these are QR codes for this deck, resources, a few different links to check out. Definitely recommend checking out our work at the lab. We have a big paper on this engagement framework that you can feel free to download if you would like. And the Self-Determination Theory website has just links to thousands and thousands of studies if you would like to dig into the literature. They have a great education page about applications of this engagement framework across all different types of education. Oh. Thank you. If you have a question, you can come to the mic or we can find a way to pass it around. And tell me if I'm phrasing this right. The question was, we know it's important for students to feel a sense of belonging, but it can be hard to help them feel that connection from early on in experience. It's a great question. We've seen in some cases that A lot of schools we work with have overhauled their orientation courses, courses that are required for learners to take at the beginning of their school experience, and within those had special training for instructors, and also designed the cohorts that are part of those classes in particular ways, so that, and embedded into the curriculum itself, intentional moments of connection about where you're inviting learners to share about their lives also, and just the experiences they're having as learners, and really just trying to, from the beginning, set that tone for sharing about what authentically is happening for you. Oh, if we can think about engagement through this lens of, to what extent are growth, belonging, and agency being supported for learners versus how many people commented in this discussion or who was on camera on Zoom today. Not that those things don't matter per se, but really focus on what is supporting or frustrating these drivers for folks. It can be really powerful. But I think I have seen it be just really incredibly transformational in self-paced learning environments, especially because all of the research about this framework is unique in that it focuses on sustained engagement versus like, is someone coming to the classroom today? It's about how can we set up this environment in a way that is going to support them coming back volitionally into the future far ahead. So I would love to talk about specific stuff related to that because there's so much to say. Yeah. Other questions? I know I'm about at time. Maybe one last one? No? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it.